Okay, good evening, everyone. Let's go take a look at the solution for assignment one from our first month of the Next Gen Underwriting University. So just as a recap, we said we were going to take the two rent rolls provided and determine what the purchase price gives us 10% cash on cash return for each property. And here's the promised video I said I'd release in 2 weeks. So the first thing we're going to do is take some of the information from the assignment and go to our quick underwriting template. For simplicity's sake, I have cleared that out for us, so we have plenty of yellow cells to fill in. Going back over here, it does tell us we're going to get the income from the rent roll. We'll do that in a moment. And assume 50% for expenses because we're not looking at T12s or P&Ls yet. Let's go ahead and put in the debt information, though, just to get that out of the way. So we said 4.5% interest only for the first year, 30-year amortization, and 80% leverage. So if we run over here to our quick underwriting template, we're going to go right here to the primary mortgage information. We said 80% leverage, which means 20% down. CapEx finance, let's just put 0 for now. May do that later. Interest rate was 4.5, and I have here amortization term 250 years if I owe. I owe is interest only, remember. So in this case, we're going to put 250 because we said it's interest only in the first year. And these numbers will fill in once we put in a purchase price over here. So I didn't mention these other numbers, but I'll tell you them now. For acquisition costs, I believe your template would have had a 3% closing cost in place, a 1% loan cost, and let's just say a 3% acquisition fee. That's probably what it is. And I usually start here with $2,000 a door or per unit for CapEx need. It's just a start. It's completely arbitrary. It's something that will develop over time. But for this example, let's just use $2,000 a door. So we'll come multiply that by the number of units over here in C7, press enter, and everything is set up. Now for future reference, we will talk about this secondary mortgage information and this mortgage assumption option. I'll touch on it briefly now just so you know what it is, but in some cases you will be taking the primary debt that's in place and you might be adding a second note behind it to get higher leverage. So for example, we just said we have an 80% leverage here. Let's say I put another 10% loan to value on top of it to have an effective 90%. There's some rules around doing this, and we'll talk about it later, but just know that you can do that, and it is something that's done, especially when you assume a mortgage. And that's exactly what this is right here. Many times in today's market or coming on the back end of times where debt has been cheap, like for example, 5 to 7 years from now, you're going to see a lot of this because debt is so cheap right now. Or long-term debt is so cheap. You're going to have people selling these 10-year notes or these properties with 10-year notes on them, and they'll still have life left on the loan. So they're going to require that you assume that loan so they don't have to pay a big penalty. So anyway, that's a way to bake that in. But for now, let's not worry about this. We're going to focus on this for the rest of the exercise. So underwriting date, I'm going to say 1/5/2020, excuse me. Property name, we're just going to say multi-family property example. Number of units, we're going to have to head over here to the rent roll to get that. Now the next things we're going to do are these income and expense numbers here. We did mention that we're going to use 50% of the income for expenses here at this point. Let's go ahead and code that in here. 50% times our income, and I'm going to drag that across here. It's not really necessary, but I'll show you why I have 3 columns here in a minute. And one other thing we talked about in the class, the CapEx reserves that the bank's going to require you hold back. I believe your template probably has $300 a unit in there. I always start right here until I know better. You could get as low as 250. A lot of brokers will tell you 250 on their deals if they've already had it quoted. This could be as high as 400. It just really depends on the age of the deal and the bank's appetite. But it's a good conservative bet to go with $300 a door unless your property was built in 1945 or something like that. So we'll put that in place. So let's go get our income. If we go over to the rent roll, first couple of things we're going to notice about this rent roll is it was pulled on August 5th, 2019. So at the time, this would have been current. You always want to make sure that date is somewhat respective to the time frame that you're underwriting for that property. Let's go count up our units here. So we see the unit number here in column A. If we scroll down here to the bottom, we see this property has 69 units. We put that over here in our template, 69. And then always fun to just walk through this and kind of see what all is included. Every single one of these you look at is going to be different. It irritates the fire out of me, but it is what it is. You see in tags, this guy has MTM. That's typically month to month, so you'll want to notice that. Okay, there's 2 month-to-month leases that we know of. Bed and bath is pretty obvious. Mostly 2-bed, 1.5, 1-3, 2.5. I did omit all of the tenant names here just for privacy reasons, but status is important. You see current, vacant rented, vacant unrented, notice rented, all these types of codes. These are going to vary as well, but you kind of get the idea. Current means their lease is going on. Vacant rented means it's currently empty, but they have an applicant that's been approved. Vacant unrented is a vacant apartment. Notice rented means someone's in it, but they've gave notice to vacate. So you want to notice this just to understand how many vacancies you may or may not have in the property at takeover, but more on this later again. Square footage, and then you'll have, let's skip over these for a second because we're going to come back to that. Your lease term, lease from, and lease to, so the initiation of the lease and the termination of the lease. If it's blank, oftentimes that means their lease expired already and they just haven't renewed. And this is kind of important that you don't always see these over here. It's good to see these because you kind of start to see the quality of tenants that are in place. If you get to a point where this number equals 2x the rent amount, you're probably going to have to count on evicting that person. So just something to think about. But again, it may just be that they're a little bit behind, or maybe a partial month behind, and a lot of times this gets squared up within a month. So it's fun to see how that trends. Once you get into due diligence. But this is a good indicator of what tenants are going to be problems for you. So then going back over here to the funds, we have market rent, and deposit. This is security deposit. We'll come back to this another time as well. At turnover, if you buy this property, when you take over, you want to make sure that these funds get turned over to you. But that's a whole other topic, which we can get into at a later date. So market rent take this with a grain of salt. This is what the current property manager and or the owner, if he's self-managing it, thinks the market rent is. It's not always accurate, I guess is the best way to put it. This will be what we're really looking for. So currently, it looks like these rents are, you see that the vacant rented doesn't have a number here because there's no income at the moment on the rent roll. So there's a couple of those. Going down here, quite a bit of variation. So that's quite intriguing. Does look like they've been in process of, if I remember this property, I think they were in process of kind of demonstrating the proof of concept on their rent raise plan by doing some updates on the apartments. You see some of these hitting like 924 versus the 790 to 809. So anyway, just for simplicity's sake, let's come down here. I like to always make sure that these two numbers add up because I've seen some either wrong math or let's just say wrong, definitely not intentionally wrong. 52,989, 52,989. That is our income. So let's take that number over here. And I'm actually going to highlight that before I save it so that anyone looking for this later can figure that out. We'll close this out of the way. Let's actually just copy that number for simplicity's sake. And let's come back over here and dump that number right here. Now, oops, what did I do wrong? The rent roll is a monthly number. we value properties in annual numbers. So we need to multiply this number by 12. So it looks like my property is throwing off about $635,000 every year. Let's see. So if we take 50% for expenses, we have $317,900. So our net operating income is literally 50% of that. So remember, we're going to have our CapEx reserves that the lender is going to hold back for us and probably escrow to make sure we maintain their asset they're lending on. And so we calculate our net operating income less CapEx, takes out that $20,000. Debt service, zero. Whoops, we need to put in a purchase price. So this was, if I remember correctly, a property in Chattanooga. Let's just start this at about $80,000 a door, because I think that's kind of where this thing wound up selling, which was astronomical, but that's okay. That was sold for way more than that, I'm sorry. So anyway, we'll start here. So now you have some numbers calculating for the debt, the down payment. Let's see, debt service is about $198,000 a year. So when we take all of our expenses, CapEx reserves, and debt, we're left with CFBT, cash flow before taxes, of $98,511. Now ask yourself, cash on cash return of 6.1. Not looking too strong for me. So we're probably going to want to go update this purchase price and figure out what can we actually give for this property. And if you paid attention in the class at all the other day, you know that DSCR, debt service coverage ratio of 1.50 is about as low as I've ever seen something work. So you're kind of at that limit right now. Cap rate, 5.8%. That's pretty sporty, especially for that Chattanooga area. So before I go iterate, let me explain one more thing in this template. Usually brokers are going to give you, they're going to look at, when they give you their numbers, they're going to look at the T12 income and T12 expenses, which is basically the trailing 12 or the full annual, statement of what those numbers were. They're also going to look at a T3 income or the previous quarter and T12 expenses. You can't use T3 expenses. You really shouldn't, because those are seasonal. I mean, think about HVACs needing servicing in the spring and fall for the upcoming seasons. Think about lawn maintenance, think of snow removal, things that just don't happen every month, right? So you always want to make sure you're using T12 expenses, but it is intriguing to look at T3 income as well, because if I compare these two numbers, I should be seeing the T3 income, if I annualize it, that is multiply the 3 months income by 4 to get 12 months, that should be a bigger number than the existing T12. Why? Because most brokers are coaching the sellers, or most sellers are savvy enough to know that they want to start, if they're positioning it to sell, they want to start boosting that net operating income and maybe start even flipping a few of the units, maybe up to 20%, to prove the concept that the market can support the rents that they're asking for. So if I put that number in, I don't have it on the rent roll here, but if we had that information, that's where it would go. And then, of course, every broker or every seller is going to have their pro forma or their future pipe dream of what they think this property can do. It's important to look at that as well. And I promise you, if these three numbers don't work, the property's probably never going to work. So just take that as you will for now. So anyway, let's go finish this example up. If we are at 6%, I don't like to buy anything less than 10. I think my absolute floor would be 8, because then I can actually pay my investors year one if I see a good enough downstream upside in the property in year 2, then maybe I'll do that. But it's always case by case, and you know what? You're going to develop your own comfort zone for where you want your returns to be. But let's just go for 10% here, just for a good round number. So let's try 4.5 million. What happens there? That puts oh wow, it's almost like I knew the answer or something. I promise I didn't. 10.1%. That's pretty good. So that tells me if the broker was asking 5.5 million, I may have to go back and say, look, I really don't think I can give it there. I mean, my returns just don't work. As you see below, I'm actually trying to pay investors, 7% in that first year, which means I only make 3. I've got to make some money too. They don't really care about that, but you can explain to them why it doesn't work and what you're seeing in the income and expenses. So anyway, if you have any questions, email me, and if not, I'll see you next time. And stay tuned for assignment 2. Ciao.